All right, hello and welcome to this training. As you can see from the title, what we're going to be covering today is the 7 levels of manifestation. And as you can see from the overview, what we're going to be talking about more specifically is first the overview itself, where everyone starts, the complexity trap, coming back around, the review, and then your action items for the day or the next few days. Now, before we get started, if you want to work with me one-on-one, make sure to book a call from the link in the description. If you want this training along with its respective document, then make sure to join the free community from the link in the description. And if you want weekly newsletters on how to improve in every aspect of your life, meaning health, wealth, love, and self, then make sure to join the newsletter, again, from the link in the description. With that said, let's get started and talk about where everyone starts. So there's a pattern in any field you can think of, and it's honestly one of the most interesting patterns if you really pay attention to it, is that the people at the very beginning and the people at the very end of understanding in any field arrive at the exact same conclusion a lot of the times, although through very different means, right? Now, this pattern also appears when it comes to manifestation, and you've probably seen this meme of the bell curve, how the person on the left and the person on the right have come to the same conclusion, although through very different means, and it's the person in the middle that really is overcomplicating everything. Now, the people at the very beginning of the journey and at the end of the journey in manifestation as well come to this exact same conclusion. They just decide what they want, they take action, they expect to receive it, and they move on with their day. Everything in between, all the technique and method and complexity, that's where most people get permanently stuck and never leave. So I want to start at the bottom of the curve with what manifestation looks like before you even know it has a name, and then we're going to move up level by level until the end. So level 1 is something you've probably already experienced at some point in your life, maybe as a kid or maybe even recently, where you just wanted something, you fully expected it to happen, and then it did, and you didn't think twice about why or how any of it worked, right? It's almost as if you're ordering a meal at a restaurant. There was no method involved at this stage. There was no journaling protocol, no 21-day challenge, no vibrational alignment routine. It was just a plain and ordinary assumption that the thing you wanted was on its way to you. And that assumption felt so completely normal and unremarkable that you didn't even notice you were doing anything worth paying attention to. Some people just call it confidence, right? Quiet confidence. And the funny part is, you didn't register it as manifestation at all. You just lived your life and things tended to line up when you genuinely expected them to, mostly because you expected them to, which, when you actually think about it, is really the purest and most effective form of the whole process, working exactly how it's supposed to work. There was zero resistance in the way, and that total absence of resistance is actually the key ingredient that makes level 1 so accidentally powerful, even though the person at this level has absolutely no clue why it works, or that they're doing something that entire communities spend years trying to reverse engineer. And the funny thing here is that at the very thing that made it work so well, the fact that you weren't thinking about it or managing it or monitoring it, is exactly the thing you lose the moment you try to turn it into a conscious practice with steps and structure. The other piece of level 1 that makes it quietly powerful, and this part becomes the rarest quality in the world the deeper you go into the later levels, is just the total and complete absence of doubt about the outcome. There was also a complete detachment about the outcome. You just wanted something, you took action, expected it to come if you take action, and that was it. And it came, right? You weren't monitoring your thoughts at this level. You weren't checking for signs or angel numbers. You weren't worrying about whether you were doing it right. You weren't checking whether you got it every single day because you're so attached to it to make sure that you're doing it right. And that lack of self-consciousness and detachment is exactly what really allowed the whole thing to move so smoothly without you getting in your own way. And there's this kind of chill vibe that basically comes with not knowing there's supposed to be a process or a right way to do it. And that chill vibe is essentially the exact same state that people at level 7 spend years trying to get back to after going through the entire curve from start to finish. And building on that, level 1 has this quality of relaxation that you just can't fake and you can't manufacture through technique, which is the relaxation that comes from genuinely not knowing there's anything to be stressed about in the first place. the trust at this level isn't earned or built through evidence or affirmations repeated 1,000 times. It's just the default setting you start with before anyone or anything teaches you some methods, and those methods making you doubt yourself. And that default trust turns out to be the single most valuable thing you had all along, even though you never knew it. And this is the thing that trips most people up later on, I think, is the realization that trust was their starting position, and they spent years trying to rebuild something they only lost because they went looking for a more sophisticated version of it. That original trust, the level 1 version of it, is actually the gold standard that every technique in the manifestation world is secretly trying to recreate, and most of them can't, because the act of deliberately trying to recreate it introduces the exact kind of effort and resistance and self-awareness that makes it impossible, and self-consciousness. The whole thing at level 1 just moved without any friction at all, because you had no concept that friction was even possible in this area of your life. And that ends up being maybe the most ironic part of the entire manifestation journey once you see the full picture. Things just showed up and you didn't question the timing or the method of delivery or whether you deserved it or any of that. You just received it the way a kid receives a birthday gift, with zero analysis and zero conditions and zero second guessing. And what's really going on at level 1, though you won't understand this until much later in the journey, is that the absence of technique is itself the technique. And the absence of effort is itself the most powerful form of alignment you'll ever experience. So keep this level in mind as we move forward through the curve, because everything that follows, all the complexity and method and confusion, is ultimately just a very long loop that brings you right back here to the same quiet, unforced, expectant place. Now, level 2 is where things start to change a little bit, where you begin connecting the dots between your inner world and your outer world. And you realize that the things showing up in your life seem weirdly and consistently correlated with what you've been thinking about or expecting lately. You notice that when you felt genuinely good about something or genuinely expected it, the thing tended to show up faster or more smoothly. And when you were stressed or heavy with doubt about it because of all the complexity around it, things either stalled completely or went in a direction you didn't want. This is the first moment of conscious awareness around the whole process. And it feels exciting and a little electric. I was there too, so I understand completely. Like you basically stumbled onto something real and significant and secret even, that most people around you either don't know about or actively dismiss. And naturally, that awareness leads to curiosity about why it works and how you can do it more deliberately, which leads to research, which leads you straight into the next level of the curve, where things start getting more complicated than you'd expect. So you might get a few more hits around this time too, things that you were thinking about that showed up almost too perfectly to be random and to be a coincidence. And these confirmations feel like solid evidence that you're genuinely onto something real and worth pursuing deeper. The early ones at level 2 basically create this kind of momentum that feels amazing. And it's that momentum that pushes you forward, that makes you want to learn more about why this works and how to do it on purpose rather than just hoping it keeps happening by accident. Now, that momentum then turns into a real hunger for understanding and more knowledge, a hunger for the system behind the results. And that hunger is exactly what pulls you out of the natural simplicity of these early levels and into the dense and crowded middle of the curve, where most people end up spending the rest of their time. And so what happens next is honestly pretty predictable, right? Once you see the pattern play out, you've had genuine results, you've noticed the connection between your expectations and your reality, and now you want the method, you want the framework, you want to understand the exact mechanics so you can make this work on command. So you start looking for teachers, for systems, for clear explanations of the process, and the manifestation space has absolutely no shortage of those, which is fine, right? It's amazing, really. Which means you're about to walk into a whole world, though, of competing methods and frameworks that all claim to be the real answer if you just follow them correctly. And they might be. But at the end of the day, they all lead to the same conclusion. There's Neville Goddard, there's Abraham Hicks, there's Joe Dispenza, scripting community, subliminal audio channels, quantum physics explanations, and dozens of other entry points into this world. And each one arrives with its own vocabulary, its own rules, and its own specific set of claims about what you need to do. And you absorb all of it because you're genuinely hungry for knowledge. And that's amazing, by the way. And you want to be thorough about this, which is also amazing. And that absorption feels productive and exciting, but it's also the very beginning of a long detour that most people don't realize they're taking until they're already deep in it. So the shift from level 2 to level 3 is subtle on the surface, but massive underneath everything. You go from someone who notices manifestation happening naturally in their life to someone who is actively trying to make manifestation happen through specific and deliberate effort. Now, the word trying is the whole key here. At levels 1 and 2, you weren't trying anything at all, right? You were just being, you were just living, you were just expecting. And the moment trying enters the picture, effort, this death grip on the results, on this attachment, this tetheredness around the outcome, a certain ease quietly leaves that moment. And that ease was really the thing doing most of the heavy lifting the entire time without you really realizing it. And this is the real departure from the simplicity that actually produced the results. And everything that follows from here is really a journey through increasing layers of complexity that will eventually, if you're one of the very few who make it all the way through, bring you right back to this same simple and quiet place you just left. And the deep irony of it, the thing you won't see clearly until you're on the other side of the curve looking back, is that you're about to spend a huge amount of time and energy learning how to do something you were already doing perfectly well without any instructions at all. So let's talk about the complexity trap. Now, levels 3 through 5 are where the majority of people in the manifestation space live permanently. This is the flat middle of the bell curve. They basically found the techniques. This is the fat middle of the bell curve, not flat. They found the techniques, they learned the vocabulary, they built entire daily routines around doing everything correctly. And somewhere along the way, the simplicity that actually made things work got completely buried under layer after layer of method. And this is where good intentions meet overthinking. And the result is a kind of spiritual busy work that feels like real progress and sophistication, but rarely delivers anything close to what early levels produced naturally and without any effort at all. Level 3 is the full research phase, where you dive deep into the content and start consuming everything you can find about how manifestation works, from long YouTube breakdowns to classic books to paid courses to entire online communities full of people sharing their specific techniques and tracking their results. And maybe you've even been on Reddit and so on. You discover scripting, visualization, SATS, meaning state akin to sleep, the 369 method, daily affirmations, subliminal audio tracks, vision boards, and probably a dozen other specific practices that all promise to be the real key to getting what you want consistently and on demand whenever you want it. The sheer volume of techniques available creates a kind of overwhelm that actually feels productive because you're learning and expanding your understanding. Again, great, amazing. But in reality, you're mostly just accumulating options without ever fully committing to understanding the single principle beneath all of them that does the actual work. So you start comparing methods against each other, trying to figure out which one is the best, which one produces the fastest results, which one the most successful practitioners use. And that comparison game can genuinely go on for months or even years without you even realizing it's become a massive distraction from the one thing you actually are supposed to be doing. And at some point, the collecting of techniques becomes the main activity itself, right? Where you're spending far more time studying manifestation and refining your approach than you're simply living in the assumption that what you want is already on its way, which is the one single move that really every technique in existence is ultimately trying to get you to, right? You build a structured daily practice around these methods. Maybe you script first thing in the morning. Maybe you run affirmations throughout the day. You do a full visualization session before bed. And the structure of it all feels disciplined and serious, like you're finally giving this the kind of attention and commitment it really deserves. So the routine itself becomes a source of comfort and even an identity over time. And you start to feel like the routine is what's producing the results, which creates a real and growing dependency on the specific method rather than on the underlying state that the method was only ever meant to help you access temporarily. And over time, the routine gets rigid and brittle to the point where missing a single day or doing a technique slightly wrong, quote unquote, makes you feel like you've disrupted the whole manifestation, which is essentially the exact opposite of the relaxed and natural expectation that made level 1 and level 2 work so smoothly and so easily. Now, level 4 is where the method takes over your life completely. And this is the level where the most people get truly and deeply stuck, sometimes for years at a stretch, because the complexity itself feels like sophistication and the daily effort feels like genuine and admirable dedication to the quote unquote craft. So you become completely focused on doing each technique perfectly, on getting the visualization exactly right in every detail, on feeling the precise emotion at the precise intensity for the precise amount of time, and any deviation from that perfect execution starts to feel like a critical failure that could ruin the entire thing you're building. I'm sure you felt like this before. So you start monitoring your own thoughts throughout the day. You start catching the negative ones and trying to replace them with positive ones as fast as humanly possible, which creates a kind of exhausting mental surveillance system that actually generates far more tension and anxiety than it ever manages to resolve or dissolve. So the whole process at this level becomes about total control of your inner experience, controlling your thoughts, controlling your emotions, controlling your so-called vibration, all this tension, right? And that desperate and constant need for control is fundamentally incompatible with the trust and the ease that made the early levels work and that the final levels return to deliberately. So you also start looking for confirmations and signs everywhere at this level. Angel numbers on your phone, synchronicities with strangers, specific songs playing at the exact right moment. And every single little coincidence becomes evidence in your mind that the manifestation is either on its way or being blocked, depending on how the sign makes you feel in that moment. So this constant sign seeking creates a heavy dependency on external validation for something that is fundamentally and entirely supposed to be an internal process. And it puts you in a permanent state of watching and waiting and interpreting rather than just knowing and living and letting things arrive when they arrive while you keep taking action. The problem with building your entire confidence on external signs is that when the signs stop showing up for a while, and they always do at some point, your whole belief system starts to wobble and shake, which sends you right back into more technique and more effort and more complexity to try to fix whatever you think went wrong this time. And the growing anxiety you feel at this level is really honestly the biggest and clearest signal that the entire approach has gone off track somewhere fundamental. Right? Because the whole point of manifestation was supposed to be that you feel settled, you feel certain and at peace. And instead, what's happening now is you feel anxious and unsure and doubtful and tense and constantly checking your phone for angel numbers, right? And here's the part that nobody in the manifestation space really wants to talk about openly or honestly. Despite all this technique and all this daily dedication and all this accumulated knowledge, the actual tangible results at level 4 tend to plateau or even decline compared to what you were getting back in the earlier and simpler stages when you weren't trying anywhere near this hard. The daily practice that once felt exciting and full of possibility now feels more like an obligation that you just can't skip without guilt. And you start wondering quietly whether you're just not cut out for this, whatever this is, right? Whether maybe you're the exception to the rule, whether maybe this whole thing works for other people but not for you. And that doubt and that exhaustion are actually healthy signals. Even though they genuinely don't feel that way in the moment, they are. Your deeper intelligence is trying to tell you that the whole approach has gone sideways somewhere and that something fundamental about the way you're doing this needs to change before anything real and lasting can actually shift. Now, level 5 is the absolute peak of the bell curve. Maximum complexity, maximum effort, minimum consistent results. And paradoxically, is probably the most important level in the entire framework because this is the exact point where the real turning point either happens or it doesn't. So you're mentally and emotionally spent from years of constant self-monitoring, technique maintenance, sign watching, journaling, visualization sessions, and the growing gap between the amount of effort you're putting in every single day and the results you're actually seeing has become too big and too obvious to keep rationalizing away. And at some point, if you're truly and unflinchingly honest with yourself about what's going on, you have to sit with the really uncomfortable admission that the version of you at level 1 and 2, the one who just expected things and let them come without overthinking any of it, was actually getting better and more consistent results than you are right now with all of your advanced understanding and elaborate daily rituals. And that admission is genuinely hard to sit with sometimes if you've spent a lot of time into this. It means all the learning, all the accumulated complexity, all those years of effort and dedication might have been a very long and roundabout detour rather than the forward path you believed it was the entire time. And accepting that takes a kind of raw honesty that most people in this whole space never quite arrive at, right? They don't want to. They cling to this. And so you start questioning the teachers and the methods and the communities you've been part of, and eventually you start questioning the one core assumption that holds the entire middle of the bell curve together, which is the assumption that more technique and more knowledge and more daily effort automatically equals better and more reliable results. It doesn't, right? This questioning phase feels like a real disillusionment at first, and it can be genuinely painful and disorienting, especially if you've built a part of your social identity and your daily routine, and maybe even your friendships around being someone who takes manifestation seriously and does the work. But right underneath the disillusionment, there's a new kind of openness that wasn't available to you at any of the previous levels. A real and honest willingness to consider that maybe the answer has always been much simpler than you were making it, maybe radically and almost embarrassingly simpler. And that openness is the narrow doorway to what comes next on the other side of the curve. Now, that isn't to say that you accumulating the knowledge, by the way, was for nothing. I'm not saying that. You just don't want to get stuck there and keep looking for the next technique and the next strategy, right? The actual turning point of level 5 happens when you stop adding more layers and start subtracting them instead. When you genuinely begin to wonder, what would happen if you just stopped doing all the techniques and the daily rituals and went back to something far more basic and far more direct? There's a moment, and it honestly looks very different for every single person who gets here, where you just get tired enough of the whole complex production that you let go of the need to control every piece of the process. And in that letting go, something genuinely and noticeably changes in a way that all the methods and techniques and visualization sessions never quite managed to produce. The relief that follows is the immediate and almost physical kind of sensation, like you've been carrying something genuinely heavy for years without fully realizing how much of your energy and your attention was taking up. And the deep irony is that this feeling of relief and lightness and openness is so much closer to the state, to quote unquote the state, right, than anything you ever manufactured through deliberate effort and technique. And in that one moment, in that open space where all the methods used to live and take up room in your day, something quieter and more fundamental starts to become visible again. Something that was always there underneath all the layers but got completely buried, which is basically just your own natural and built-in ability to assume and expect and take action and receive without turning any of it into an elaborate daily production, right? The clarity that arrives right at the tail end of level 5 is a bit hard to describe in words, but it's immediately and unmistakably recognizable when you actually feel it settling into place. You finally understand, not intellectually, but in your whole body, that you were always the mechanism yourself. The techniques were all just elaborate and roundabout ways of giving yourself permission to do something you had the ability to do directly the entire time. And that clarity points you straight back towards the simplicity you started with at the very beginning of the curve, like we talked about earlier. Which means the bell curve is about to start its descent down to the other side, back towards the same quiet and unforced place where you began this whole journey. And the strange thing about being genuinely ready for the next phase is that it feels a lot like giving up on the whole project entirely. forgetting about it really for some time, which is honestly the last thing you'd ever expect real forward progress to feel like after spending years operating under the belief that effort and precision and technique and discipline are what make the results happen when it comes to manifestation. But that feeling of giving up is actually the threshold itself. The people who push through it, who let go of the complexity, even though it feels reckless and irresponsible, are the ones who make it to the other side of the curve. The ones who can't let go just circle back into level 3 or 4, and then they start the whole cycle over again with a new teacher or a new method, right? Now, let's talk about coming back around. So this is where the bell curve completes its full arc. Level 6 and 7 are the other side of the curve that descend back into simplicity. And from the outside, the people at those levels look almost identical to the people at level 1 and 2. They just decide what they want and they expect it to show up, right? The critical difference, and it's a significant one, is that they've been through the entire curve from beginning to end. They understand at a deep and lived level why simplicity works and why complexity didn't. They're not naive about it, they're clear about it. And that hard-won clarity is what makes the simplicity completely unshakable in a way it could never have been at the very beginning of the journey. So there's a benefit through all of this at the end, right? Level 6 is where you come back to the basics fully and deliberately, but now with complete understanding of why the basics are all you ever actually needed, and is the most genuinely peaceful level in the entire framework because the searching and the striving and the daily optimizing are finally and truly over. And you can now clearly see that every technique you ever learned was really just a different packaging of the exact same one move, which is assuming the reality of what you want, living naturally from that assumption in your day-to-day life and taking action, creating an identity around it, really. And the technique itself was never the active ingredient at any point along the way. The core mechanism was always assumption, always. Like Neville Goddard said it in the plainest terms possible. The feeling of the wish fulfilled is the whole thing. You just expect it to happen. You just have unwavering confidence that it's going to happen, so you detach completely from the outcome. And at level 6, you finally understand what that sentence actually means, right? In a way that goes well beyond intellectual knowledge into something you've personally lived through and tested and confirmed for yourself through years of direct experience on both sides of the curve. All the layers have been peeled away at this point. There's no more daily scripting sessions. You can keep them if you want, but now you understand the whole idea behind them. There's no more 369 sequences, no more tracking angel numbers on your phone throughout the day, no more checking your vibration or worrying about negative thoughts. It's just a clean and direct and beautifully uncluttered relationship between what you assume to be true and what eventually shows up in your actual life. And that stripped down simplicity creates a real and tangible freedom that is genuinely hard to overstate. The freedom to just live your full life naturally without the constant mental overhead of maintaining and managing and monitoring a separate manifestation practice running alongside everything else you've got going on. And going a bit deeper into what makes level 6 different from level 1, even though they look the same on the surface, is that the simplicity here is chosen rather than accidental, right? At level 1, it's simple because you don't know anything. At level 6, it's simple because you know everything, kind of, right? Which gives it a completely different quality and a completely different kind of resilience when things get challenging. You've tested the alternatives. You've spent real time in the complex middle stages of the curve. You know firsthand and from personal experience that more technique does not equal better results, and that knowledge isn't theoretical for you anymore. It's something you've lived through and come out the other side of, right? That lived experience creates a settledness that level 1 simply can't have, because level 1 simplicity was fragile and easy to knock over the moment someone introduced doubt or complexity, while level 6's simplicity has already survived the full weight of the complexity and come through it intact and even stronger. So at level 6, manifestation stops being a thing you do as a separate, deliberate activity in your day and becomes just a part of how you naturally move through the world, which is the best thing ever, right? You almost feel like you can predict things, that you can predict the future, essentially. That's the level of confidence you have to have in yourself. And that only comes once you understand all of this. And this sounds vague when you say it like that, but in actual practice, it just means that assuming the best possible outcome becomes your default setting rather than a special exercise you have to remember to perform, right? The effort fully and completely disappears at this level. You don't need to remind yourself to stay in the state or maintain your vibration or protect your energy or any of that, because all of those concepts have been replaced by something so much simpler and so much more stable, which is that just a natural and settled and quiet knowing that things tend to work out when you genuinely expect them to. That's it. If you take action too, by the way. So it feels natural at this point, the way breathing feels natural, which is the entire difference between level 6 and level 4. At level 4, you are forcing and monitoring and controlling. At level 6, you're just living from a different default. And the results take care of themselves without you having to manage every detail of the inner process. And the results at this level are actually far more consistent than anything you produced during the complex and effortful middle stages of the curve, which makes complete sense once you see the consistency always came from the stability and naturalness of the internal state rather than from the precision or correctness of any external technique you were running. So the daily experience of level 6 is honestly pretty ordinary and undramatic, right? You wake up, you go about your day, you make decisions from a place of quiet assumption rather than anxious hope or desperate technique, and things work out more often and more smoothly than they did when you were putting in 10 times the effort. And there's this quietness to it that would have felt boring or maybe insufficient when you were in the complex middle stages, because back then you equated effort with progress, and quiet felt like you weren't doing enough. And there was all this tension, right, that we were talking about. But now you understand that quiet is where the actual power always lived the whole time. It was in the simplicity of it. And like we discussed earlier with level 1, that trust is back now. That same easy and unforced trust, except this time you understand exactly why it works. And that understanding makes it genuinely unshakable in a way level 1's innocent version of trust could never have been on its own. Now, level 7 is the very end of the curve. And the thing that makes it so genuinely fascinating is that from the outside, it looks exactly and indistinguishably like the very beginning. You decide what you want, you expect it, you go about your day taking action without monitoring or checking or adjusting, and that's the entirety of it. The difference between level 7 and level 1, and this is the whole point of the bell curve framework, is not what you do, but the fullness and the understanding behind what you do, right? At level 1, the simplicity was accidental, like we discussed, and easy to shake. At level 7, it's chosen and completely unshakable. You've personally seen and tried the entire landscape of methods and systems and frameworks out there, and you've come back deliberately and consciously to the most basic version of the process because you know from years of direct experience that absolutely nothing more complicated is necessary. So there's a depth and a resilience to level 7, to that version of simplicity that level 1 simply cannot have. And that resilience is what really makes it hold up when things get difficult or when doubt comes knocking at the door, which it still does. Occasionally, it always does, even at this level. You don't spiral back into technique. You don't reach for a new method. You just return to the assumption, let it settle, and keep moving in the real world, taking action in reality, knowing that the thing is coming. Now, level 7 is a quiet level. There's nothing flashy or dramatic or impressive about it at all. There's no vision boards on the wall. There might be, but they're not needed, right? There's no scripting journal on the nightstand. There might be, but it's not needed. You know that you don't need it anymore. There's no affirmation recordings queued up on your phone. There might be, but you now know that you don't need them. Just a person who learned through the full and complete arc of the entire journey from beginning to end that the only thing that ever actually mattered was what they assumed to be true about themselves and their life, about their identity and their life, right? And the knowing at this level is different from belief, which is an important distinction. Belief still has a little bit of hope in it, right? A little bit of wanting it to be true. Knowing is something you know. There is no need to believe it. You just know it. Knowing is just settled and complete and done. Like knowing your name or knowing where you live. There's no effort required to maintain it and no anxiety attached to it. There's no hope around it. You just know it, right? And so the bell curve completes itself right here. The person at level 7 and the person at level 1 are doing the exact same thing from the outside looking in. The only real gap between them is understanding. And the person at level 1 doesn't know why it works. The person at level 7 has stopped needing to ask. And so the bell curve completes itself right here, right? The most advanced level of manifestation looks completely and utterly ordinary from the outside. And that is honestly the final and most important lesson of this entire framework. The truth was never hidden behind complexity or advanced technique or secret teachings, even though you most likely will only get to this realization after you go through the whole bell curve. It was hidden behind simplicity, which happens to be the one place that most people stuck in the overcrowded middle of the curve absolutely refuse to look. Now, I'm explaining all of this knowing that you will most likely go through the entire bell curve, right? But why this training is hopefully valuable to you is that the most important part is not getting stuck in levels 3 to 5, right? You need to move on from that at some point. There's a real and settled and lasting peace that comes with arriving at this level, level 7, because you're no longer searching for the answer or optimizing your daily approach or wondering anxiously whether you're finally doing it right this time around. You've already been living the answer since level 1. You just had to go all the way around the entire curve to finally see it clearly for what it actually always was. And that's really the whole thing, the whole arc. The whole journey summarized in 7 levels that form a perfect loop from simplicity through complexity and back to simplicity again. And the only question that matters now is where you are on that curve and whether you're willing to let go of whatever's keeping you from moving to the other side of it. Level 7 doesn't feel like an achievement or a milestone or a destination you arrive at with a sense of accomplishment. It feels more like coming home to something you always had, which is the most anticlimactic and the most profoundly satisfying ending you could ask for at the same time. You're not a different person at level 7 than you were at level 1. You might be, but you're the same person really, with the same natural ability, with the same built-in capacity to assume and expect and receive. Nothing about that specifically changed. The only thing that's changed is that you now understand what you're doing and why it works, and that understanding lets you do it with full confidence and complete peace of mind. Right? The journey is over at this point, to a degree. Not because you've mastered some advanced skill or unlocked some hidden level of consciousness, but because you've realized there was never anything to master in the first place. There was only something to remember, and now you remember it, and that's enough. So from here on, it's just living, just being, just moving through your days with a quiet and unshakable assumption and confidence that what you want is yours. The same way you did at level 1, except now you'll never lose it again because you understand exactly what it is and why it works and how you almost buried it under years of complexity that was never needed. And that's the gift of going through the whole curve, the thing that makes the journey worth it, even though the destination turns out to be where you started, right? You needed to go through it to understand what you had. You needed the complexity and knowledge, really, to appreciate the simplicity. This is why I said it's not bad to collect the knowledge, just don't get stuck there. You needed to lose the natural state to value it enough to protect it going forward. It really is that simple. That's the punchline the bell curve has been building towards this whole time. The beginner and the master land in the same place. Everyone else is overcomplicating it in the middle, and the way out of the middle is to stop adding and start subtracting until there's nothing left but the one thing that always worked. So with that said, let's go over the review. We talked about the overview, where everyone starts, the complexity trap, coming back around, the review, and finally your action items for the day or the next few days. First, figure out honestly where you are on the curve right now. And if you're somewhere in the middle, buried under a stack of techniques and methods and daily rituals, recognize that the complexity itself might be the single biggest thing holding you back from the results you've been working so hard to produce. Then start removing layers this week, one at a time. Drop a technique, then drop another one next week, and pay real and honest attention to whether your actual results change at all, or whether the only thing that changes is how much mental energy you are spending on the whole process every single day. And finally, practice the level 7 move, which is Also, the level 1 move: decide what you want, expect it fully, go about your day, take action in real life, and let the simplicity feel uncomfortable at first if it needs to, because that discomfort is just your mind adjusting to the realization that it genuinely can be this easy and this straightforward, and that it probably always was. With that said, I hope you enjoyed this training. If you did, and if you want the document along with the training, make sure to join the free community from the link in the description. As always, if you want to work with me one-on-one, make sure to book a call from the link in the description. We help entrepreneurs and high performers basically master their health, wealth, love, and self, their health, wealth, love, and mind through one complete self-mastery system. So book a call from the link in the description. And if you want weekly newsletters on improving in every aspect of your life, meaning health, wealth, love, and self, then make sure to join the newsletter, again, from the link in the description. Thank you for being here. Thank you for the support as always, and I'm going to see you in the next one.